All right, as uploading, I have just finished recording the next episode that you're about to watch with Graciela Villarreal, who is the senior creative producer over at Amazon Health Services. Graciela and I have connected a few different times over the past couple months, and it struck me how much depth she has and so much seniority in this role, how many lessons she's learned along the way. She has a really fascinating story about how she ended up in the position she is. So we're gonna dive into her story, but make sure to stay past her story, because when it comes to being successful in an in-house producer role, if you need to hire an in-house producer role for photography, for content, for video, we break down how you do that, what you look for, what are the skill sets that are needed, and so much more. How to build a creative brief, how to respond to a creative brief. There's just a lot of tactical and helpful tips. So let's get right into Graciela's story. Well, let's dive right in. Let's start at the beginning as senior creative producer of Amazon Health Services, but early on, Graciela's career, where did it begin? What got you into this space?
I think people will find it interesting that I started off in PR, public relations, first in tech, and then in-house retail. But in doing that, I really loved fashion and magazines and really kind of wanted to travel. And there was a career that brought those two pieces together of like traveling and coming up with trends and forecasting it. But I was given a good piece of advice, like to get there, you're going to have to start at the bottom. Somehow you're going to need to be a buyer in the fashion industry and world. So I had a really good friend working for Gap at the time, a college friend, and she was hiring a sample coordinator. So that's like the very, very entry level when it comes to like corporate retail. So did a big pivot, and you'll hear me say that word a lot. And sometimes you need to go a little bit backwards to get forward. So I did that for about 6 months. And I think, I'm a really hard worker, and it wasn't like beneath me to be like folding clothes and like organizing a sample closet, whereas before I was going to like PR events, inside a big major retail company with fashion models or musicians, and so here I'm in a sample closet, I'm folding clothes, I'm tracking down samples. And I think just that tenacity got me recognized. And when an opportunity for a promotion came up within like 6 months, I took it. And so I was an online assistant merchant, and I loved working with our marketing team, coming up with ideas. I liked the assortment of online. I didn't like the actual number piece and having to kind of work with our financial team to figure out we have X amount of like assortment, what goes on sale, how can we make money? That was just not my jam.
Sure.
And when I decided to leave, our photo producer with Gap had left as well. She was working with a major retail company, Restoration Hardware, doing their catalog. And she reached out to that same mutual friend and said, do you think she'd have an interest? And when she reached out to me, and I was like, yes. So we thought it'd be a great blend of when you're on set, you're working with a freelance team, creative director, photographer, you have for crew, but you need someone in-house to kind of really talk about like the assortment and why we're shooting these drapes or that specific color couch versus like maybe a couch that the creative director would love. And it has to do with inventory and, pushing sales. So having that background felt like a really good fit. I had not actually been in production per se, but there's a lot of scheduling, planning. You're in the office for 2 weeks, you're on location for 2 weeks, it's scouting locations, studios with natural light, it's working to plan your assortment, get the samples. And that's something I was really familiar with, tracking samples down. Instead of a closet, it was a warehouse, and then hiring your entire crew. And it was a lot of fun. And it was kind of one of my favorite jobs I've had. And then I moved to New York. And then that same friend was working for another retail company. And again, it was online e-commerce. So I kind of shifted back into that role of assortment and working with our creative directors for like emails. And that was a whole new thing. And working with that team and making sure that the marketing we were pitching in our emails, we actually could back online. We had the assortment, working with buyers again. And that just naturally progressed. It transitioned to another role later on with some bigger retail companies back at Gap. But this time it was more of a promotion producer for online. So you're basically taking all of the marketing campaigns and the assortments and all of the promotions that they need. So it's working again with the marketing people, the creative team, supporting the email assets, creating them, working with web developers. And I liked it. I liked what I did. I liked the people. I liked the discount, but I knew I could make more. Living in San Francisco and being in Silicon Valley, it was like, how do I transition to tech? Because that is where the money is. And I didn't have tech background, but I was able to pivot again. I hit a plateau, but to make more in the role that I found, I was going to need to transition from like a full-time role to like a contract role. And in order for me to do that, I just said, could we commit to a year as a contractor versus like 6 months? If I can have that year security, then I'm willing to continue the conversations and interview, and did. And it was a good change pivot because it was for Facebook, working again with their creative team. It was a small team. It was 5 of us. We were all contracting, and we were working with the marketing team over at Marketplace and really kind of coming up with the visuals to support their messages and really trying to get either buyers to come buy or sellers to come sell. So what can we do to get them? And again, it was online, but now it's in tech. It's making more money. It's a small team, but it was just a contracting role. And then when that time was up, the role that I saw online was a digital role. So again, it's e-commerce, but this time it wasn't retail. It was for healthcare, and it's selling membership, right? For concierge healthcare. And they really needed someone to kind of help with like SEO and to work with web developers and to really work with the marketing team to figure out planning in advance the calendar and how can we message the site, keep it fresh, keep people coming and getting them to actually buy a membership, and partnering with creative and in-house engineers. And then we were acquired. So that is it in the biggest nutshell, if I can ever give it to someone.
Yeah, no, that's great. And at One Medical, which was just the healthcare concierge company you were with, what was your role title there?
Digital producer.
And were you still overseeing the photo shoots and still assets, or was it mainly focused on the SEO and that strategy side now?
Yeah, it was primarily focused on the marketing website. So I didn't have to worry too much about the photography or any of the digital assets. It was the creative team that really managed that, but it was partnering with them for any specific e-commerce related campaign or messaging. Sometimes the bigger campaigns would have new landing pages, or sometimes it was just like a digital asset that was needed for like your homepage, and then working with them with their copywriters and planning out timelines for when a launch would happen. And we would need to kind of flip the site, but it was primarily just for the marketing website for them.
So going from fashion and retail to tech and now over into healthcare, spending a lot of time in healthcare marketing myself, everyone always says this is kind of a cliche of like, it's just a totally different animal. Health is a completely different beast. What was some of your experience moving from marketplace to now the healthcare marketplace in some of the things that were unexpected there?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is when you're working in retail, you're working with seasons, you're working with, merchandise, you're trying to sell a product that's physical and it can't be stored in a warehouse anymore. The biggest difference then moving into the healthcare space is what we're trying to do is really offer excellent care when you're in the office, and to have quick access, to not have to wait 2 weeks, 3 weeks to see a primary care doctor. Like, this is what membership gets you: same next day appointments. It gets you an in-house lab. It gets you instant messaging. It gets you a video chat if you're traveling. That was the biggest change, and just kind of wrapping my brain around the fact that that's what we were providing and not actual clothes. And then the goals are really different. And then I was so used to having a seasonal calendar and being able to like work with marketing teams, with like a marketing calendar and really plan that out. So that process when I joined was lacking. And I remember one of the first questions I said is like, where's the marketing calendar? And there wasn't one. So it was kind of like, okay, what can we do to bring a little process to the entire team? Is it possible? Can we do it? So those were the two things that were like the biggest kind of eye openers for me.
What ended up being the answer there? Was it like, well, this is just how things are? or this is just how the industry is?
Yeah.
Or was there like an evolution that you were able to help bring about?
Well, I think the first thing I was able to do is just bring a little organization as far as the kind of requests that people wanted to make for the marketing website, whether it was just changing an image or a headline. I could bring some process to that piece internally for us. It eventually got to the point where the different teams were able to create a calendar as best as we could with like an overview. So it got to the point where my role eventually transitioned from digital producer over to the creative team. And so internally, with their project manager and working with the marketing team, there was a calendar that was created, and it would be by month, high level, what some of the messaging would be and what they need support, whether it was digital, direct mail, email, for the marketing website. For social, we could at least see in advance. Once a week, we would meet and we would have them go through their upcoming plans. So we eventually got there, but it took a collective effort to get us to that place. But it didn't exist when I started, for sure. And then when it came just to the actual website itself, I could at least build out a calendar, but based on kind of the placement of the website, it could give marketers like a really good idea of the marketing website and the different messages they had, and maybe where you need to suppress a banner or a different message there. So I could plan that out for them in a visual kind of way that no one had done before either.
What were some of those either like rules or new guidelines or processes related to getting that request in to the team that maybe began to adapt and change within the organization?
I mean, I think it evolved over time. The company at the time acquired a senior health service. So our team grew. And with that, a lot of internal changes had to happen. Our directors and our VPs really did a great job in kind of just hearing the feedback and like, what kind of changes can we make? So I think having a team with an open mind that's willing to try one process, and if it's not working for the collective, where do we need to pivot and make a new change and create a different process? Sometimes in some companies, you're working so fast that you don't have the time to try a process. Everyone's just kind of running around to get the job done. But I think to do it well, you need process. I think that was the biggest key, is that we could all see and come together as a collective that like, let's give this a go. And if it doesn't work, let's change and not be afraid to try something.
I think within even our own processes here, just simply the amount of, project management tools that we've gone through over the years. And what we ended up finding was maybe the one that had all of like the bells and whistles in a certain order, or whatever the things that in the purchasing decision seemed to be the best. The one that we actually stuck with was the one that people ended up actually just using. And that collective buy-in, you could have a like better software, but if nobody's using it, it's still a broken system. Obviously over there, one of the biggest changes was when Amazon acquired you guys, and major shifts happened there. I know we've talked about that in the past. What happened when you moved into now a new organization and kind of straddling that change from this is how we've been doing things, this is now how you want us to do things? What were some of the good things, and what things were like, man, this feels unnecessary or sticky?
I could say I personally was excited thinking, wow, it's a big global company. They've got to have the calendar. They're going to have all the things that we've been trying, to create for ourselves. I was pleasantly shocked to find out that didn't really exist either.
They're all still humans, you're saying?
Yeah, they're all still humans. It's still a relatively new area. Those of us that were fortunate to kind of get an offer to, join the team there. It was a small performance marketing team that we joined. And yeah, they had a different tool than we did. We came from a place where we really were able to get legal reviews tied down. We were able to get anyone on the marketing team, that submitted a creative brief to be responsible to know that if they needed to go to clinical ops to get reviews, they knew that they had X amount of days to get a turnaround and to do, rounds of feedbacks. And so we all kind of got to this place where we knew the timelines. We knew that any communication that was going to happen was going to be in this one project management tool. Everyone kind of just held hands. And it took a process. Like my former colleague created an entire Google slide sheet, and we walked them through this new tool, right, when we brought them on, and This is how we're going to communicate. This is the new process. So joining a team that already had something established, you just observe. You're not going to rock the boat, right? You are kind of reviewing their intake. You notice that there isn't really a creative brief the way that you're used to working. It's done in a completely different tool. Even that was a big adjustment from working with a company that just uses Google Suite to one that like doesn't, and the nuances there. It's really just a couple of months of observing like how they work as a team. The communication style was really different too. One Medical really prides himself on what we call CI care. So even in the corporate environment, it's an introduction and it's a greeting and it's your job title and what you do and the objective of the meeting. And you really start out that way and your cameras are on. Coming here, it wasn't like that at all. It was like cameras are off. You're not reading the brief in advance. You're taking the first 10, 15 minutes to do so. So it was a big adjustment. It's really just observing and not jumping in a gun blazings with like, let's make some changes.
I mean, I think it's amazing how simple it seems to request something, but any of us in the creative field understand that the game of communication isn't just the final output that you're making to talk to the audience. It's the ability to communicate well within the team to bring them on board into the understanding of the objective of the content. At One Medical, you helped bring your background, build that from the ground up. Like you said, with Amazon, a behemoth established company, you got to sit and watch for months how they did things. What are some of your takeaways at the most tactical level of the basic components of kind of a creative brief? And let's maybe look at it from the perspective of your role. Like a fellow creative producer is being given things to achieve. What are some of the things that they're like, I need these boxes ticked to actually be able to effectively produce, develop this content?
You need like a clear project overview, right? An understanding of specifically what they're looking for. Ideally, target audience would be nice. Deliverables, timelines. I mean, everyone's going to always ask for it as soon as possible. But I think it just depends on how big the request is, or if it's a major campaign, or if it's just an email versus like a social post. Those things are, they're going to have different timelines versus a video. Who your stakeholders are. And then I think if you're going to do any kind of testing, what does that success metric look like? What is it going to be to make this successful? And then when you're acquired by a company, sometimes it's like, what kind of branding are we doing, right? If it's a request where you're asking for 35 deliverables, it's really trying to figure out, do you need all 35 by the state? Can we prioritize? Can we phase them out? Phase 1, phase 2. Even when you have a perfect brief, there's always gonna be that room for, oh, we've seen the creative, we've seen the copy, and we know we've asked for this, but now that we've visually seen it, we need to kind of really make a change. That's always a possibility. That happens a lot. And then when it comes to, delivering everything, you have reviews along the way, but that's what I'd say is needed up front, when you get a request.
Yeah. And to your point, a lot of aspects are like standard project brief, the schedule, the deliverables. But I think, for someone more junior, understanding within that of, okay, here's the deliverable set, here's the due date. These two things might not have to be 35 items tied to this. Within your role, knowing what you can manage, knowing what you can output, there has to be a level of boundary that gets set up. How do you manage that within a corporate environment that has you be both a team player and understand that like sometimes things need to happen fast, sometimes there's not the information that's needed, and also kind of protect the quality of the work that you're doing, dare I say your own sanity as
and
well.
Your team too, right? Yeah,
and
it's my job.
And everyone further down the line
Yeah.
as well. Like what are some of your perspectives on managing that and being a person who can carry boundaries within, a business that needs creative assets?
Yeah. So I think it was a lot easier in retail, right? Because you're selling clothes. So it's easier to kind of get a request that's needed ASAP. And you can say, okay, let's prioritize Is it US? Is it Europe? Like which country? If there was a last minute change to an email creative, do you have the data to support that? Is this really going to move the needle if we make this change? So those are simple ways to set some boundaries. I think one example was getting a request on a Wednesday for something that was needed Friday. And it's not that that was completely wild, but when you have your coworkers say, leadership said this. Okay, well, which leader, right? Or I remember an example, the feedback I got was, well, I wasn't in the meeting, but I was told that this was needed soon or urgent. And I said, that's great, but I don't know what that means.
Right.
Is that a day? Is that two? And so again, I think being inquisitive, asking more questions. If they don't have the answers, they need to go get them for you. And then it got to the place where it got escalated and we're in a meeting. And I said to this leader, like, when I hear that, I don't know what that means to you. Is that a day? Is that 2 days? He said, that's fair. So again, it's communicating, and boundary setting sounds maybe like really wild and scary for some people, but it can be something as simple as that, right? And then if something does need to get done quickly, it's asking, okay, what can we pause? And then this work can be prioritized. And then the work that we did pause, we can't get it to you by this date, but we can get it to you by this date, and always offering alternatives. So it's boundary setting, but also acknowledging that the work can get done just at a different time. And so those are the kinds of things I've acquired throughout the years, to protect not just myself, but the team, right? We'll go out of our way to make anything work as best as we can. And for some reason or another, we do the work and then now it gets stuck in some kind of review. Yet it was needed ASAP. And you're like, okay, well, we delivered, so we're not the blocker. So
Yeah.
boundary setting can be really important. But I think to do that, you need a team that really needs to know what the priorities are and the clear vision and the goals for the quarter.
Yeah.
So that it helps you as a producer make those calls. And if you don't know, you just ask more questions. And if they don't know, they need to go ask more questions.
It's a great takeaway because you're not just like setting a boundary for boundary's sake. I think we've all kind of run into those folks who they're just a bottleneck, kind of just for the sake of holding a project captive, it seems like, but recognizing the problem with the time frame and being a part of the solution, not just pointing out the issue or what makes it incapable. And speaking of like your trickle down team and the folks working under you as well, for your peers, for other creative producers, how do you go about building those contractor relationships, those vendor relationships, building that team that you have a little more control over versus the folks who are maybe hired in-house? What are some of the things you look for? What are some of the red flags you've seen over the years? Or what are a couple of your filters related to bringing in outside support?
I think this creative community does it. Like, asking your peers, who have you worked with? Is there anyone, great that you've built rapport with? Working for such a big company, there's so many loopholes into getting a vendor onboarded, and it's not as straightforward as it used to be. What other teams within the organization, who have they used? Who have they worked with? And building a relationship with my associate creative directors and working with them to figure out what the goal is, if they're going to bring a new vendor on, or can we utilize a vendor that's already in the system? So it's setting up a meeting to then figure out, like, is this a good fit? Is it not a good fit? If it is a new vendor, it's timelines. Can they get it done in your timeline? Because you have a timeline you're trying to deliver. It could be around your budget. And sometimes it's about quality. And then sometimes it's like you're going to go with the person that seems to have it, fits your budget, you've heard good things about, they've come recommended. So you take a gamble and you bring them on. And then if it doesn't work out, unfortunately, don't bring them back, right? But you're trying to establish a rapport with someone new. But I can't think of any major red flags. I mean, I think the obvious ones that everyone would say, like if they're not getting back to you, right, in a timely manner, if they're not communicating, if you've agreed to like 2 rounds and now it's going into 3 rounds and they haven't communicated. Those would be red flags you would look for, right? Or if I have to be the one that's constantly following up and asking and I'm not getting the updates, those would be red flags for sure.
Yeah, because in media, especially in the early stages of that relationship, of the, just conversation around the project, someone's usually revealing the best version of themselves and their communication. And if it's already bad at that stage, it's only downhill from there
Yeah.
once they have the award, once they're in the project.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I remember we needed to do a photo shoot for all our providers. My ACD and I met with 2 different teams. You had specific questions around like lighting, and you're going to be in different locations, maybe different cities. How can you ensure that it's going to be consistent? And so one vendor just didn't answer kind of the way that would make us feel confident. And then we had another vendor that did. But to your point, once the work was done, we were like, what happened? Everything that they said they could do didn't really come through in the end. And so our ACD stuck with doing a lot of retouching. So again, that happens too, right? So you don't really know until you start working with them too. It's just a risk sometimes.
And I think, obviously, like, we hire vendors to support our agency. And then, as an agency, we're supporting our clients. And I think, when I talk with other studio owners, sometimes it's easy to forget how much is actually riding on you being able to fulfill what you say you're going to fulfill. Because, your rep or your salesperson or your business development person is often kind of disconnected from the production team. And hopefully there's a good relationship there. Like, you're not selling what you don't offer just to kind of get that person in. And I think for a person to open themselves up to a new vendor relationship, they risk having to do a lot of retouching later. Yeah. They risk their job in the most extreme circumstances, and it's just not to be taken lightly. And kind of along the hiring track, we watch these waves happen where, creatives come in-house within brands, and then they kind of go back out of house to agencies or freelancing and get hired by those brands separately. In the wave of somebody looking to fulfill, let's say a head of marketing is looking to fulfill an in-house role for a creative producer, somebody to oversee visuals, photo, video. What do you think, being in that role, are some of the critical things that they might not be thinking about, that they should be considering or learning about to make sure that hire goes really, really well?
It's a personality fit, first of all, right? Like, I think sometimes it's a vibe, whether it's an in-person interview or a phone call or, on screen like this, your team, you kind of know how you mesh and how you communicate. So I think 1, it's a vibe. 2, I think sometimes you have to be comfortable working in ambiguity, right? Like we said, you're not always going to get the perfect brief. So how comfortable are you jumping in? How comfortable are you being resourceful and like figuring out who to go ask for? I've worked with people where, when you start, you have the one person and they're your go-to, but how can you expand and how can you get comfortable like going to other people or setting up those meetings and those relationships outside of your team to build rapport? So I think being comfortable, and not an aggressive way, but just being comfortable doing that, right?
Yeah.
And then being really curious, like asking questions, wanting to learn more, getting a better understanding of like the different roles on your team, and someone who seems like really genuinely interested in the process of like what it takes to be a part of a creative team. So I think those are things to always look for when you're interviewing or looking to bring someone on, whether they're a coordinator, or I've been in roles where I've got to actually interview the person who's going to be my boss. So that was always really fun and interesting too. But I say those are the things that I look for and that what people should look for.
Did you pull out any questions that you loved or were excited to ask your potential future boss? Any left hooks you were trying to bring to the table?
I don't think so. Not that I can recall.
You were kind.
Yeah, I think we were kind. And that at that point in that role, I looked at my coworker and I said, you should really just go for this position. Like, why are we trying to hire outside, right?
Let's wrap up on this. I always love to ask this question because I think with fellow creatives, there's always just something going on. What for you have you been kind of like chewing on, thinking about lately, like excited about within the industry, or just curious about within the industry recently, or you feel like you want to dive into?
I don't know if I want to dive into it, but I'm super curious. And I think all creatives might be curious a little maybe even worried just how we're in this new era of AI. And what is
Sure.
AI going to do?
Yeah.
And I think some companies are really embracing it, other companies, maybe not so much. So I think that that has really been on my mind for the last 2 months. It's something that Amazon is really embracing and taking on. So I'm super curious. I think everyone thinks that it's all about speed and how to get the output quickly. And I'm not sure we're thinking really about the actual creative, but
Sure.
personally, I think if we're thinking about quick output, then the collective's not thinking about the actual creative and what it looks like and the feelings and the emotion it can bring. So I think that part's going to be really interesting to see what happens. And I think not just for creatives, but I've talked to an engineer on the same thing. Like, I think everyone across the board is kind of, at least in the tech world, thinking about like what kind of changes this going to bring about in the future.
Yeah, same. No, I think it's a fascinating space to be like exploring and not be like afraid of, but also not like overly confident in. It's just, navigating the capabilities is actually kind of difficult because I think there's so much noise in the space right now. 90% overpromise, under deliver. And then you do find those couple little gems where you're like, oh wow, this actually made things a lot easier. This did speed up things that could be sped up. I think as I think about it, I wonder what's going to actually happen from a like neurological standpoint to our capability, to like our brain being a muscle and being willing to like focus on things longer without burnout. And, that's kind of my curiosity is that like, will we surrender some of our brain power by too heavily relying on, let's call it fast casual content, I guess.
Yeah. No, I think it's true. I heard somewhere that because we're constantly using our GPS to navigate where we're driving, we're not using a specific part of our brain anymore. So we're actually doing ourselves a disservice by relying on the navigation tool to tell us where in the past we just did it by memory, right? Or you'd ask someone for directions and maybe you'd get lost, but you'd pull over, but you'd figure it out. And so it kind of goes back to your point. I think that there is a possibility that like you are going to rely on it too much, then what happens to our cognitive learning? And, so what's interesting to think about too.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And one kind of thought along the same line, I was just reading a book this morning about the irony of many even, Silicon Valley tech leaders sending their kids, spending loads of money to send their kids to private schools that are unplugged and device free. Yeah. And the awareness of just like the power of this, versus just being so sucked in. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. Anyway.
It is. Yeah.
We could go into that for probably 2 hours.
I'm sure.
Well, Graciela, it's always so great to chat. I think you have such like a depth that we're only scratching. And so thanks for coming on the Union Way and looking forward to staying in touch as always.
Thanks for having me, Dustin. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and chatting. So really appreciate it. It's been fun.
Absolutely.